Hey guys, we're going to dive a little bit deeper into ovary. We're not only going to look at the phases that occur within the ovary, but also look at what makes up the ovary. So we have two phases that occur within the ovary. And this is what we're looking at right here is the ovary. So we have the follicular and the luteal phase. So I'm going to put those right there. So if we look at these root words, we can determine what the dominant structures are of each phase. So if we look at follicular, we can find follicle. So our dominant structure within the follicular phase is a follicle. We look at luteal, you can see that our dominant structure is going to be the corpus luteum. So follicular, follicle, luteal, corpus luteum. All right, next thing to go over. So within females, oogenesis occurs before birth. So after birth in females, our number of eggs are going to decrease over time. I have this line drawn right here so that we can separate our follicular from our luteal phase as we talk about them. So let's start with our egg nest right here. Again, we said our number of eggs within a female are going to decrease over time, and it's predetermined. So this is our egg nest. So going into our follicular phase, we're going to have some primordial follicles emerge. So that's what we're going to draw here. So next, we're going to have a series of follicular waves occur that finally lead to a dominant follicle. So we're going to go through one follicular wave. We'll have a series of follicles that make it, and then we're also going to have some that die off. Again, we'll have another follicular wave. We'll have some follicles that make it, and again, some that die off. And then lastly, we'll have a dominant follicle that is left after these follicular waves occur. So leading up to this point, we had a hormone known as follicle stimulating hormone that was involved. Okay, again, we said we start with our egg nest. We'll have some primordial follicles that occur. They'll go through a series of follicular waves. Then we'll end up with a dominant follicle. So this dominant follicle is then going to go on to a primary follicle. Our primary follicle will then develop into a secondary follicle. And here in just a second, we'll go through and look at each follicle and see what makes it unique to itself. So we said this was a secondary follicle. Then finally, this secondary follicle will then develop to a tertiary or Graafian follicle. Alright, now let's look at the difference between the primary, secondary, and tertiary follicle. So a primary follicle simply has one layer of granulosa cells around it. Secondary follicle will have 2 or more layers of granulosa cells surrounding it. And then a tertiary follicle will again have multiple layers of granulosa cells, but the difference is it's going to have an antrum in it. So this antrum is a liquid-filled cavity. It will have what is called liquor folliculi in it. This liquor folliculi is a hormone-rich liquid. Okay, so we've made it through this part of the follicular wave. Now, moving forward, we're going to have ovulation occur. So we have this tertiary follicle that is then going to ovulate outside the egg. So we said this is ovulation occurring. And this is our egg that is ovulated. So in order for ovulation to occur, we must have an estrogen surge right here. So hormones play a very important role within the ovary. And these cells surrounding each follicle, believe it or not, have a role within that. So looking back at these follicles, one thing that I didn't mention earlier was the different layers of cells. So we said these were granulosa cells. But more specifically, we have a theca externa, a theca interna, and then we're going to move in and have a cumulus orifice, which is these cells that create a mound at the bottom of the egg. And then we're going to have the corona radiata, which are the cells that touch the ovum directly. All right, so before we move on to our luteal phase, let's wrap up our follicular phase. So again, we said we're going to start with primordial follicles. We're going to move on, have a series of follicular waves occur. That will bring us to our dominant follicle. Then we're going to have a primary, secondary, and tertiary follicle develop. That will then go on to ovulate. So, our main outcome that we want to happen within this follicular phase is to have a viable egg that ovulates that can then go on to be fertilized. All right, so let's look at our luteal phase, which is going to occur right in this bottom half. So this same structure that the egg ovulated from is going to come in here, it'll close up, and then it will go on to produce our corpus luteum, or for short, CL. So this CL helps to maintain pregnancy by putting off progesterone. So in absence of a CL, we're not going to have a pregnancy. If for some reason we have a pregnancy and then the CL ruptures, it will cause an abortion. So our dominant hormone up here in follicular phase is estrogen. Below here in the luteal phase is going to be progesterone. So now that we've covered everything that goes on within the ovary, from start to ovulation, then into pregnancy, let's talk about the structures within it. So there's two parts to the ovary. We have the medulla, which is the core or the inner, which is made up of blood, nerves, and connective tissue. Now on the outside, we're going to have our cortex. The cortex is composed of 3 different layers. The surface epithelium, which is going to be the outside. Then we'll have the tunica albuginea, which is composed of connective tissue. And lastly, the parenchyma, which contains the potential eggs that will develop. So we have lots going on in the ovary, but again, some take-home stuff for you to remember. we've got two phases that occur within the ovary. The follicular and the luteal phase. Our dominant structures are going to be the follicle and the corpus luteum. Our main goal for the follicular phase is to produce a viable egg that can then go on to be fertilized. In the luteal phase, we'll have a corpus luteum that forms. This will maintain pregnancy by producing progesterone. Again, we have two parts to the ovary, the medulla and the cortex. Now, this is a very important thing to remember. In a mare, the medulla and the cortex are reversed. So in a mare, the cortex is going to be the inner part of the ovary. The medulla is going to be the outer part. So when a mare becomes pregnant, she has to be ultrasounded in order to find that CL, since it can't be palpated. So reproduction can seem like a complicated thing, but if you stick to your basics, don't worry, you'll succeed.